She was invisible. That was the whole point. But he saw her anyway, and what happened next will stay with you long after this video ends. If you've ever felt like the world was designed to crush people like you, this story is going to hit differently. Stay with me because this one is worth every single minute. And before we go further, if you love emotional, slow burn stories that actually mean something, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss one. Okay, let's begin. And Howard had a system. Show up. Do the work. Don't be seen. In a hotel like the Meridian, the kind of place where powerful people came to be private and secrets stayed behind locked doors, being invisible wasn't just a job requirement. It was survival. She had learned that in her very first week. She had smiled at a guest, a man in a gray suit who smelled like old money and expensive cigars, and Miriam, the head of housekeeping, had pulled her aside with a grip that left no room for argument. You don't exist here, Anne. That's how you stay safe. And hadn't smiled at a guest since. It was 9:30 on a Tuesday night, and Anne was inside Suite 1. The penthouse floor. The room no one talked about in polite company. The room that belonged to him. Dan Mackenzie. Owner of the Meridian. Owner of, according to the quiet rumors that drifted through the staff hallways like smoke, a great deal more than that. She had cleaned this suite twice before. Always on Tuesdays. Always between 9 and 10 when the schedule confirmed he was out. She had been told never to touch his desk, never to open the closet on the west wall, and never, under any circumstances, to remain past 10:15. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. The suite was enormous. 3 rooms, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the river, dark wood, leather furniture, and a scent she couldn't quite name, amber, maybe, or sandalwood. Everything was immaculate. Not in the way of a man who simply hired people to clean. In the way of a man who kept order as a form of control, as a language, as a statement about who he was and what he allowed in his world. And was finishing the bathroom, wiping the mirror in long practiced strokes, when she heard it. Not the soft click of the service entrance she'd come through. The front door. Heavy. The kind that required a key card only 3 people in the building possessed. Her hand stopped mid-stroke. She set the cloth down slowly, as if any sudden movement might change the nature of what was about to happen. Her pulse ticked upward. She stepped out of the bathroom and into the main room. Dan Mackenzie stood in the doorway. He was taller than she remembered from the one time she had seen him cross the lobby. 6'2", maybe more, with the kind of frame that looked like it had been built for something harder than wearing tailored suits. Dark hair cut close. A jaw that could have been carved from the same stone as the hotel's facade. His eyes were gray. Not the soft, uncertain gray of clouds. The gray of gunmetal. Of winter rivers. And he was looking at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. The silence stretched. 2 seconds. Anne's fingers curled at her sides. She should apologize. She should explain that she was on the cleaning schedule, that she'd be out in 3 minutes, that she was sorry for the intrusion. She opened her mouth. He spoke first. Come here. His voice was low, not loud, not threatening exactly, but it carried the weight of a man who was never refused. And didn't move. He tilted his head slightly, then stepped to the side and gestured toward the hallway behind him. Let me show you something. Every instinct told her to leave. To mutter an excuse and walk past him and clock out and never clean this suite again. But something in his expression held her. A flicker behind the gunmetal. Not cruelty. Not desire. Something closer to urgency. She set down the cloth. She walked toward him. He led her into the hallway and to a door she had always assumed was a utility closet. He pressed his thumb to a small panel on the wall, biometric, and the door clicked open. Inside was a room she had never seen on any floor plan. Small. Windowless. Lit by a single desk lamp. A wall of monitors displayed camera feeds from every floor of the hotel. On the desk sat a phone, a glass of water, and a manila folder. Dan picked up the folder. He held it out to her. This man, he said. Do you know him? And took the folder. Inside was a photograph, grainy, pulled from a security camera, of a man in a dark coat standing in the hotel lobby. Her stomach dropped. She knew him. Victor Salido. The man who had loaned her $4,000 6 months ago when her brother Eli's medical bills had swallowed everything she had. The man who had promised flexible repayment terms, and then 2 months later had started calling at midnight, showing up outside her apartment building, leaving notes under her door with numbers that grew larger every single week. The man who last Thursday had grabbed her wrist outside the subway and whispered that there were other ways to repay a debt. And stared at the photograph. Her hands were trembling. She hated that. The trembling betrayed everything she worked so hard to hide. "He came into my hotel," Dan said. His voice hadn't changed in volume or pitch, but something in it had hardened. "Twice this week. He asked about you at the front desk. Described you. Your name. Your shift. And looked up. How do you... I know everything that happens in this building." He paused. "And I know when someone is hunting." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "Sit down," Dan said. It wasn't a command exactly. It was more like a man who could see that her legs were about to give out. He pulled a chair from behind the desk. And sat. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs to stop the shaking. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this man she didn't know and didn't trust and had no reason to believe would help her. "Tell me everything," Dan said. "Start from the beginning." She told him. Not because she wanted to. Not because she trusted him. But because she was so tired, so deeply bone-tired, of carrying it alone. And when someone finally asked with eyes that didn't flinch, the words came out like water through a crack in a dam. She told him about Eli. 8 years old. Her half-brother. Technically same mother, different father, both long gone. Diagnosed with a congenital heart condition at 5. The first surgery had been covered, barely, by a patchwork of charity care and a fundraiser organized by their neighbor, Mrs. Okafor. But the second surgery, the one the doctor said he needed before he turned 9, cost more than Anne would make in 3 years. She told him about the loan, about how she had found Salido through a friend of a friend, how the terms had seemed almost reasonable at first, how the interest had ballooned, how the calls had started. She told him about her apartment on Delancey Street, the one with the radiator that only worked half the time and the window that didn't lock. About the after-school program that watched Eli while she worked her double shifts. About Mrs. Okafor who checked on him in the evenings. About the way Eli asked every single night when and would be home, and how most nights the answer was "Late, buddy, but I'll be there when you wake up." She told him about the bruise on her wrist. The one she had covered with a long-sleeved shirt even though it was June. Through all of it, Dan Mackenzie sat motionless. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort or reassurance or any of the things people said when they wanted you to stop talking about your problems. He just listened. Gray eyes fixed on her. Absorbing every word like a man cataloging facts. When she finished, the room was very quiet. "How much do you owe him?" Dan asked. 7,000, she said. "He says 12 now with interest." Dan's jaw tightened. "He's lying. The interest is fabricated. His entire operation is unlicensed. He preys on people who can't afford lawyers." And looked at him. "And what do you do?" It was a reckless question. She knew what the rumors said. She knew the kind of men who owned hotels like this, who had biometric locks on hidden rooms and walls of surveillance monitors. She asked anyway. Dan held her gaze. "I do a great many things that most people would rather not know about." A beat. "But I don't hurt people who don't deserve it. That's what they all say." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Almost respect. Like he was recalibrating something in his assessment of her. He had expected her to be afraid. She was. But she was also the kind of afraid that turned sharp instead of soft. "You're right to be skeptical," he said. "But here's what I can tell you." What he told her rearranged the map of her world. Victor Salido was not merely a lone shark. He was a node in a network, a sprawling, rotting system of exploitation that stretched across 3 boroughs, funded by a man named Councilman Raymond Birch. A politician who presented himself as a champion of low-income communities while quietly profiting from their desperation. Birch funneled money through shell companies to men like Salido, who offered predatory loans to the most vulnerable people in the city. Single mothers. Immigrants without documents. The elderly on fixed incomes. The interest rates were criminal. The collection methods were worse. Dan had been watching Birch for 2 years. "What?" and asked. "Because Birch tried to buy this hotel," Dan said. "And when I refused to sell, he sent men to persuade me. One of them put a colleague of mine in the hospital." His voice was flat, controlled. "I don't forget things like that. So this is revenge." "Partly." He met her eyes. "Partly it's the fact that Birch destroys people like you for profit. And I find that unacceptable." And turned this over in her mind. She was sitting in the hidden office of a man the world called a criminal, being told that another criminal, one who wore a suit and sat on a city council, was the real monster. It should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt like the truest thing anyone had told her in years. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Dan's eyebrows rose. "I didn't ask for anything. You showed me the file," she said. "You told me about Birch. You didn't do that just to inform me." She leaned forward. "What do you need?" For the first time since she had known him, which was admittedly less than an hour, Dan Mackenzie almost smiled. It didn't quite reach his mouth. But it was there in his eyes, a warmth cracking through the frost like the first real day of spring. "You're right," he said. "I need a witness. Someone who can testify to Salito's practices. The threats. The fabricated interest. The intimidation. I have records, but records don't have faces. Juries believe faces. I'm building a case." He paused. "Birch's entire funding structure runs through Salito's operation. If Salito falls, the money trail leads straight to Birch. I have a contact in the district attorney's office who has been waiting for exactly this kind of evidence." And sat with this. She could hear the faint hum of the building above them. The hotel going about its business. Guests sleeping in expensive beds, none of them knowing what was happening beneath their feet. "If I testify," she said, "Salito will come after me." "You will try," Dan said. And his expression settled into something she recognized. The look of a man who had been underestimated his entire life and had made that underestimation into a weapon. "You will fail." Over the following days, something changed in the architecture of Anne's life. She still arrived at 6 in the morning. She still cleaned rooms, changed linens, scrubbed tiles while her knees ached and her back screamed. But now she was aware, in a way she hadn't been before, of being seen. Not by the guests. By the building itself. The first morning after their conversation, she found a new pair of work shoes in her locker. Her size. The kind with reinforced soles that cost $80. She had looked at them once in a store window, then kept walking. There was no note. 2 days later, Miriam told her she'd been reassigned from the overnight shift to the day shift. "Management decision," Miriam said, with an expression that made it clear she'd been told not to elaborate. And noticed other things too. Rowan, the security guard near the staff entrance, thick arms, permanently neutral expression, had started walking her to the subway each night. He didn't say much. Just fell into step beside her, hands in his pockets, and didn't leave until she'd gone through the turnstile. "Boss's orders," he said when she asked. And Dan himself, she didn't see him often. He moved through the hotel like weather, present everywhere but visible only when he chose to be. But sometimes when she was restocking a supply closet or passing through a corridor, she'd feel a shift in the air and she'd look up and he'd be there. At the end of a hallway. In a doorway. Never approaching. Just present. Their eyes would meet for a fraction of a second. Not predatory, not possessive, but with an attention so focused it was almost physical. And then he'd be gone. It unnerved her. It also, in a way she refused to examine too closely, made her feel safer than she had in months. On the 5th day, Anne was arranging flowers in the lobby when a man sat down in one of the armchairs near the window. She didn't look up at first. Then she heard him clear his throat. "Excuse me, miss." She turned. The man was mid-40s, thick-necked, wearing a suit that was expensive but poorly fitted. He smiled at her. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for a young woman who works here. And Howard. You wouldn't happen to know her." The flowers trembled in Anne's hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm new. I don't know most of the staff." The man studied her. His smile widened. "That's funny. Because you match her description exactly." Before Anne could respond, a shadow fell across the man's chair. Not metaphorically. A literal shadow. Large, dark, attached to a body that blocked out the light from the window. "Rowan." "Sir," Rowan said in a voice that contained all the warmth of a closed fist. "Can I help you with something?" The man looked up. Calculated. Reconsidered. "Just asking for directions," he said and stood and left. Anne's hands were shaking again. Rowan looked at her and for the first time, his neutral expression softened into something almost gentle. "Go take your break," he said. "I'll handle the flowers." She nodded. She went upstairs and locked herself in the staff bathroom and pressed her back against the door and breathed. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. That was Jorge Paya. "He works for Salito. Don't worry. He won't come back." She stared at the message. She didn't know how Dan Mackenzie had gotten her number. She didn't know how he had known about the lobby visit within minutes. She didn't text back. But she saved the number. 3 days later, Dan found her in the staff kitchen. She was eating a peanut butter sandwich. No jelly because jelly was an expense and reading a library book. It was 10 at night. Her shift was over, but she was waiting for Rowan to finish his rounds. Dan appeared in the doorway. He was wearing a dark coat over a dark shirt and he looked like he'd been somewhere that required both. His knuckles, she noticed, were red. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "I don't go places without knowing where I'm going." He paused. That flicker again, the one that might have been respect. "The hotel has a lower level below the basement. I want to show you something that concerns your brother." Eli's name was the key that turned every lock she had. She put down her sandwich and followed him. They took a service elevator to a floor she hadn't known existed. The doors opened onto a long corridor, surprisingly well lit, polished concrete floors, recessed lighting. It didn't feel like a basement. It felt like a place someone had deliberately hidden behind the face of the building. Dan walked ahead and she followed until they reached a door at the end of the hallway. He opened it. Inside was an office, warmer than the surveillance room, more human. A wooden desk. Bookshelves lined with actual books. History, philosophy, poetry, their spines cracked from reading. A record player in the corner. On the wall, a single framed photograph of a woman with dark hair and tired eyes who looked like she had once been beautiful and was now simply enduring. His mother. And knew it without asking. Sit, Dan said, and this time the word was softer. He sat behind the desk and placed a folder in front of her. She opened it. Inside were medical documents. Her brother's medical documents. His diagnosis. His treatment history. His surgical projections. And beneath them, a letter from Dr. Miriam Torres at Columbia Presbyterian, one of the best pediatric cardiac surgeons in the country. The letter confirmed an appointment for Eli Howard in 2 weeks. And read it twice. 3 times. The numbers at the bottom, the ones detailing the cost of the procedure, had a line drawn through them. Beside the line, in handwriting she didn't recognize, were 3 words. Taken care of. She looked up. Her vision blurred. How did you? I have resources. I can't accept this. You can. You don't understand. I don't take things from people. I don't. Her voice cracked. She pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling, fighting the tears, refusing to let them win. Dan was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. And look at me. She did. His gray eyes were steady. There was no pity in them. Pity would have broken her. What she found instead was something she couldn't name. A gravity. A certainty. As if he had made a decision about her place in his world and nothing would unmake it. This is not a gift, he said. And it is not a debt. I'm not Salido. I will never come to collect. He paused. Your brother is 8 years old. He deserves to turn 9. That's all this is. The tears came then. Not the weak, defeated kind she had been fighting for months. The kind that come when something you have been holding finally breaks open, and the thing underneath is not pain but relief. She put her face in her hands and wept. Dan didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He sat on the other side of the desk, still as stone, and waited. When she finally lifted her head, eyes red, breath ragged, he slid a glass of water across the desk. Drink. She drank. Now he said, we need to discuss Salido. We need to talk about the case. About Birch. About what comes next. Anne, still breathing through the aftermath of tears, looked at this complicated, dangerous, inexplicably decent man and said, I'm ready. Eli's surgery was scheduled for a Thursday. And took the day off, the first day she had taken in over a year. She sat in the waiting room at Columbia Presbyterian with her hands clasped between her knees and she waited. Mrs. Okafor sat beside her, knitting something small and blue. A hat for Eli, she said. For when he came home. Mrs. Okafor was 72 years old and had been more of a mother to and than any woman connected to her by blood. She didn't ask where the money for the surgery had come from. She simply said God provides and went on knitting. The surgery took 4 hours. When Dr. Torres came out, she was smiling. Anne's vision went white at the edges. She heard the words, successful, strong recovery, but they reached her as if from a great distance. Through water. Through years of fear. Eli was going to be all right. And excused herself. She walked down the corridor to a stairwell, sat on the cold steps and called the number she had saved. Dan answered on the first ring. He's okay, she said. Her voice broke on the second word. There was a pause. Then good. That was all. One word. But she could hear something in it. A thread of relief so thin it was almost invisible, stretched across the silence like a wire. Thank you, she said. I know you said it's not a debt. But I need you to hear it anyway. I hear you. She wanted to say more. She wanted to say that he had changed the shape of her world. That he had taken a situation she had been drowning in and pulled her to the surface with hands that were strong enough to crush but had chosen instead to lift. She wanted to say that she saw him, not the reputation, not the power, not the cold exterior, but the man underneath. The one who kept his mother's photograph on the wall and read poetry in a hidden room beneath a hotel and couldn't stand to watch someone suffer the way his mother had suffered. She didn't say any of it. Not yet. I'll be back at work Monday, she said instead. Take the week, he said. His voice was gentle, genuinely gentle, a quality she had only heard in flashes before, and it stopped her mid-sentence. Take the week. Be with your brother. The hotel will survive without you. She closed her eyes. On Saturday night, 2 days after Eli's surgery, and was in her apartment, sitting on the edge of his bed, reading from the dinosaur book. He was propped up on pillows, his small chest wrapped in bandages, his eyes bright and alert. "Read the part about the T-Rex again," he said. "I've already read it 3 times. 4 is better." She was halfway through the 4th reading when she heard it. Not a knock at the apartment door. A knock at the building's front entrance, 3 floors down. Heavy. The kind that didn't ask for permission. Then her phone rang. A known number, not Dan's. She answered. "Miss Howard." The voice was smooth, unhurried, almost amused. "My name is Jorge Paya. I believe you've been talking to people you shouldn't be talking to. I'm going to give you a choice. You can come downstairs and have a conversation with me. Or I can come upstairs and have a conversation with your brother." And looked at Eli. He was watching her. The dinosaur book open on his lap. His eyes wide and trusting. Now she told him. "Stay here. Don't move. I'll be right back." She went to the hallway. She called Dan. He answered before the first ring finished. "Paya is outside my building." Her voice was controlled now. The trembling had been replaced by something harder. Colder. Born of a simple and absolute truth. No one was going to threaten her brother. Not tonight. Not ever. "I know," Dan said. "Rowan is 3 minutes away. Do not go downstairs. Lock your door. Don't answer it for anyone you don't recognize." Dan. 3 minutes. "I promise." She locked the door. She pulled Eli's dresser in front of it. She went back to his room, sat beside him, and picked up the dinosaur book. "Where were we?" she asked. Her hands were steady. "The T-Rex," Eli said. "Page 42. She read. She read about the Cretaceous period and extinction events and fossilized bones while her heart hammered against her ribs and the clock on the wall counted the longest 3 minutes of her life. Then she heard it, not a knock but voices downstairs. Loud. Then quieter. Then silence. Her phone buzzed. "It's handled." "Open the door." "Rowan." She moved the dresser. She opened the door. Rowan stood in the hallway, his expression its usual unreadable mask, but his breathing slightly elevated and a split across one of his knuckles. "He's gone," Rowan said. "He won't come back." "How can you be sure?" Rowan looked at her with something that might have been pity or might have been the certainty of a man who had seen how this particular story ended many times before. "Because the boss doesn't make promises he can't keep." The arrest made the 11 o'clock news. And watched it on the small television in her apartment. Eli asleep in the next room, Mrs. Okafor dozing in the armchair. She watched as Victor Salido was led out of a restaurant in handcuffs, his face contorted with fury. She watched as Councilman Raymond Birch was escorted from his brownstone by federal agents, his expression carefully blank, his lawyer already at his side. And she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she had almost forgotten the shape of it. Safe. The next morning she gave her statement. A woman from the DA's office, calm, professional with kind eyes, recorded everything. The midnight calls. The fabricated interest. The bruise on her wrist. Jorge Paya outside her building. All of it. When it was over, the woman closed her notebook and said, "You're very brave, Miss Howard," and almost laughed. Brave? She had been terrified every single day for 6 months. She hadn't been brave. She had simply had no other option. 2 weeks passed. Salido was denied bail. Birch was suspended from the city council pending investigation. Paya had been picked up at a bus station in New Jersey, trying to flee. The network was unraveling, strand by strand, and with every strand and breathed a little easier. Eli was recovering beautifully. Back in school with restrictions. No running, no climbing, checkups every 2 weeks. But his color was good and his energy was returning. He had started drawing dinosaurs and taping them to the refrigerator. And every time and looked at them, she felt something luminous and fragile expanding inside her chest. She went back to work at the Meridian. But the hotel felt different now. Or maybe she did. She moved through the halls with her shoulders back, her hands steady. She still cleaned rooms, still folded towels, but she no longer felt invisible. She didn't see Dan. Not for days. Not for a week. She looked for him in hallways and doorways, in the spaces where he used to appear and disappear like a change in atmospheric pressure. He wasn't there. She asked Rowan. "He's handling something," Rowan said, which told her nothing. On a Tuesday night, exactly 1 month after the first time she had heard those words in Suite 1, and stepped out of the staff entrance and into the warm evening air. And he was there. Standing on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his dark coat, looking at her the way he always looked at her, as if she were the only thing in the frame and everything else was background noise. "Walk with me," he said. They walked through streets cooling in the dusk, past bodegas and brownstones and trees heavy with summer leaves. They didn't speak for 3 blocks. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers assessing each other. It was the silence of 2 people who had been through something together and were still learning the language of what came after. Dan stopped outside a building on a quiet side street. A brownstone, modest and well-maintained, with a green door and a small garden in front. "What is this?" Dan asked. "It belongs to a friend of mine. She rents apartments. 2-bedroom. 2nd floor. Good light. Radiator that works. Window that locks." He paused. "The rent is reasonable. The neighborhood is safe. There's a school 3 blocks east with a program for children with medical needs." And stared at him. "Dan, it's not charity," he said. "The rent is market rate. You can afford it on your salary, especially with the raise that Miriam is processing." "What raise?" "The one that reflects what you're actually worth." She looked at the building. Green door. Garden. A window on the 2nd floor where the light was on, warm and amber like a promise. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Not with suspicion. Not anymore. With the genuine, bewildered gratitude of a woman who had spent so long bracing for the worst that the presence of something good felt almost disorienting. Dan turned to her in the fading light. His face was softer than she had ever seen it. The angles were still there, the jaw, the sharp planes of his cheekbones, the controlled set of his mouth. But his eyes had changed. The gunmetal had warmed. There was something behind it she had only seen in flashes before. On the rooftop, in the office, in the moments when his guard dropped just enough to let her glimpse what was beneath. "Come here," he said. She stepped toward him. "Let me show you something." He reached into his coat and took out a small, worn book of poetry. She could see the spine, soft from years of handling. He opened it to a page marked with a folded corner. "My mother used to read this to me," he said, "when I was very young and the world felt too large. I didn't understand the words then. I understand them now." He held the book out to her. She took it. The page was marked with a single passage, underlined in pencil. The delicate, deliberate hand of a woman who had loved language even when the world had not been kind to her. And read it silently. The words were about shelter. Not the kind made of walls and roofs. The kind made of choosing, again and again, to protect something fragile in a world that wanted to break it. She closed the book. She held it against her chest. "This is what I want to show you," Dan said quietly. "Not the apartment. Not the surgery. Not the case against Birch." He held her gaze. "I want to show you that someone is standing here. Someone who isn't going anywhere. Someone who will not let the world break what you've built." And looked at him, this man of shadows and silence, of surveillance rooms and hidden offices, of violence contained and tenderness concealed. She looked at him and she saw clearly the shape of what they had become to each other. Not a transaction. Not a rescue. A recognition. 2 people who had been carrying impossible weight and had found, in the space between them, a place to set it down. She didn't say "I love you." That would come later, slowly, carefully, the way trust had grown between them, through watched hallways and rooftop silences and the sound of one person's breathing steadying in the presence of another's. What she said was, "Show me the apartment." And she smiled. It was the first real smile she had given anyone in a very long time. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in December, and sat at the kitchen table in the apartment with the green door while Eli drew dinosaurs at her feet. The apartment was warm. The radiator worked exactly as promised. The window was locked. On the refrigerator, between Eli's drawings, was a photograph from his last checkup. Eli grinning with a stethoscope around his neck, Dr. Torres kneeling beside him with an expression of genuine delight. Beside it was another picture, one Mrs. Okafor had taken on Thanksgiving. And Eli Rowan, who had turned out to be surprisingly talented at carving turkey, Miriam, who had brought 3 kinds of pie, and Dan. In the photograph, Dan was standing slightly behind the group, his expression its usual controlled mask. Except for his eyes, which were looking at Anne and which, if you knew what to look for, contained everything he had never learned to say out loud. Anne's phone buzzed. A message from Dan. Downstairs. Brought coffee and something for Eli. She went to the window and looked down. Dan stood on the sidewalk, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, a wrapped package under his arm. He was looking up at the window and when he saw her, he lifted one of the cups, a gesture that was almost casual. But his eyes gave him away the way they always did. Eli appeared beside her, pressing his nose against the glass. "Is that Mr. Dan?" "That's Mr. Dan. Can he come up?" "He's already coming up." "Does he have a present?" "It looks like it. I bet it's a dinosaur book." "I bet it is too." There was a knock at the door. And went to answer it. and she was smiling before she reached the handle. Smiling because the apartment was warm and her brother was healthy, and the man at the door carried coffee and children's books and a kind of devotion that he expressed not through words but through acts, through presence, through the daily, ordinary decision to simply be there. She opened the door. "Come in," she said. And Dan Mackenzie, the man they called a monster, the man who kept his mother's poetry in his coat pocket and surveilled loan sharks and funded surgeries for children he had never met, stepped inside and set down the coffee and handed Eli the package and stood in the middle of Howard's kitchen as if it were the only room in the world he had ever wanted to occupy. And for the first time in a very long time, the door closed. Not to keep something out, but to hold something in. Something whole. Something warm. Something worth everything it had cost to find. If this story moved you the way it moved me, please take a second right now to leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Was it Dan's explanation for why he helps people? Was it Eli's surgery? Was it that final moment at the door? I read every single comment and I would genuinely love to know. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this, someone who is carrying too much alone right now, please share this video with them. Sometimes the right story at the right moment changes everything. That's exactly why I make these. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. It means more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.